Chapter 10. Stephanie. Present day. So there's this huge book, and apparently it's full of stories and letters and drawings about the war. I told Tara at the Vine later. She was polishing glasses and I watched her. Now as I talked, she handed me a cloth and pushed one of the glasses towards me. I screwed the cloth up in my hand after they ignored the glass. Finn had to go, so I didn't get to have a proper look inside, but he says it's unbelievable. It should be in a museum or something, not an old people home. Where did it come from? She frowned. Was it stashed in a closet somewhere? It was in the basement, apparently. They found it a couple of years ago when they were doing building work. And this guy, this Finn, he's the one who found it? I scoffed. No, he's a historian. That's not a job. I threw my head back in triumph. That's what I said, but apparently he teaches history or something. And he has a book now. Yes, and it's amazing. Now you sound like a historian. I leaned on the bar, looking out over the table so I didn't have to meet Tara's gaze. And ever so casually, ever so quickly, I said, I thought it might make a good subject for the community art project, you know? Presents from the past and all that stuff. What? Tara bellowed, so loudly that the two women sitting in the deep conversation to the side of the bar both looked up. Shaking out the cloth I still held in my hand, I pretended to wipe a non-existent mark from one of the beer bumps. I thought it might be a good idea for the grant application. Tara squeezed my arm. Yes, this is perfect. She took the cloth from me and gave me a little nudge in the small of my back. Go on then. Go where? Go home. I looked up at the clock on the wall. I'm working until 10. No, now you're not. She looked around the bar. It's quiet, and Lucas is working at 8. I can hold the fort until then. Why do you want me to go? I was confused. So you can get started. No. Now go on. I don't want to. Stevie, go home now, or I'll fire you. You wouldn't. Tara folded her arms and stared at me, unsmiling. Try me. I wasn't about to test her resolve. I'm going, I said, skirting around her and lifting the hedge to get out from behind the bar. When I was safely out of arm's reach, I headed, but I'm not happy about it. She threw the cloth in my retreating back and I ran. If I knew, I went back to my flat and got comfortable. I never ventured back down to the garage. So when I got home, I didn't go up the stairs. Instead, I left my bike leaning against the wall outside. It took me a moment to get accustomed to the dim light inside, so I had to blink a few times as I slowly approached my stack of canvases, nervously as though they might come for me, like a lion tamer approaching a lion. Come on, Stevie, I muttered. Come on. My forehead was sweaty. I wiped with the back of my hand, annoyed at myself. I reached out for one of the carrier bags that I shoved all my equipment into. I didn't need the paints or anything like that at the moment. I just needed a sketch bag and some pencils, really. All I wanted to do was to start getting some ideas on paper. It's no biggie, Stevie, I told myself. Stop making such a meal of it. Obviously, all my pads were at the bottom of the bag. I reached inside, wishing I had the cash to buy just new stuff, instead of going through this trip down memory lane. But if I didn't, so I had to grit my teeth and get on with it. I pulled out a tin box, which I knew had tubes of acrylic paint in it, and put it down on the concrete floor of the garage with a clatter. A tray of watercolors followed, and underneath that was a stack of tiny canvases. I caught my breath. Normally I painted a stack of tiny canvases. I painted as big, not as big as Morrow perhaps, but I painted on canvases in the size of fence panels, swirling the paint across them. They were kind of landscapes, but not, and they had been the paintings that got me noticed and had been in the exhibition. But when things started getting complicated in my life, Dad moving abroad, Nan's dementia, and Max being Max, my paintings got smaller and smaller. By the time Max stole the contents of my flat, I was painting tiny squares of canvas the size of a ready meal container. Tight, dense pictures, which I could see now as I pulled them out of the bag, were really not very good. And then, after the police arrived at the gallery and I had the heart-stopping moment, when I thought my brother was dead, I couldn't paint at all. I dropped the little canvases next to the paints, and as I did, a photograph fell straight to the ground and skidded across the smooth floor. It was my favorite photograph of Max and me, taken when we went to the classroom together years ago. I was looking straight at the camera, beaming at whoever had taken the picture. I couldn't even remember now, and Max was laughing and looking at me with such love that it made my heart skip. We'd been such buddies back then. He'd been my best friend in the world, and now he was in prison, and I was on my uppers, and he hated me. How had everything fallen apart so completely? hands began to shake, my chest tightened, and I felt my breathing get shallower. I'd been standing, leaning over the bags they rooted around, but now I sank to my knees because my legs were suddenly unable to support me. No, I breathed. Not again. I had thought the panic attacks that had plagued me after Max's arrest were in the past. I'd not been able to afford counseling, but I leaned back with some basic strategies and a little bit of the therapy course I completed. And I'd also done a lot of Googling, and some of the techniques I'd found online had helped. I had had not one for ages. But here I was, crouched on the dirty garage floor, trying not to be sick as my forehead grew clammier, my breathing more rasping. My heart was racing, and I thought I might pass out. I put my head down onto my knees, squeezing my legs tight, and tried to concentrate on breathing in through my nose and out through my mouth, counting to 5 each time, just like I'd seen on one of the websites. With my head still on my knees, I put my hands down on the floor, feeling the dust on the rough concrete. I could smell the washing powder I used to clean my jeans and engine oil, and I could hear my breath more regular now. I kept breathing and counting, and I felt my pulse return to normal. I lifted my head, and to my shock, I saw Micah sitting next to me, watching me with a concerned expression. He reached out a hand and put it on my arm gently. "I didn't want to scare you," he said. "Panic attack, yeah?" Surprised by his insight, I could only nod. "How do you feel now?" he asked. I breathed in deeply. "It's going," I told him. "Better?" He gave me a little smile. That was a long one. "Do you?" He shrugged his skinny teenage shoulders. "School's not always easy, you know." I felt a rush of affection for this cocky man boy. "I know. Gaming helps," he said. It stopped me thinking all the stuff that's in my head. "That's good. Fancy it? Gaming?" "Yeah, I'll show you what to do." He unfolded his long legs and stood up, holding his hand out to me to help me to my feet. "You're very kind," I said. He rolled his eyes. "Don't tell no one." I saw him glance at the photo I dropped in my pack of painting bits and pieces. "Do you want me to bring that back?" I shook my head. I just needed a sketchbook. Efficiently, Micah scooped up the picture from the floor and wiped the dust from it on his behind. "I'll put this in the bag and keep it safe," he said. He dropped it to the equipment, making me think we had different views of what constituted keeping something safe, and then reached down and pulled out a sketchbook. "This one." "Perfect." Feeling stronger, I spotted a pack of pencils in the other bag, along with a case that I knew had colored pencils in it, and pulled them out too. "So," I said to my school uniform savior, "what are we playing?" It turned out Mike was absolutely right. Gaming did stop me thinking about my troubles. We played 2 matches of a football game, which I lost so thoroughly. Micah laughed like a train. Then he showed me a cowboy game that was almost a film because the story was so gripping, and I found a strange satisfaction in the story and shooting all the baddies. And we played, eyes focused on the screen in front of us. Micah occasionally chatted. I was worried about big tasks, he said out of the blue, scoring another goal against me. "Get in." I freak out and I can't get started. I've had some help at school and stuff yet, and now I know to start with one little bit of it. So if I'm worrying about doing like my chemistry homework or something, I just tell myself to do one question, that's all, because that's manageable, isn't it? It is, I said, impressed. That's good advice. So whatever you're worrying about, maybe just start small. Maybe I will. I thought for a second. "Have you ever done any art, Micah?" He looked dubious. "Like coloring it?" I laughed. "Maybe. Anything, really." I adjusted my posture on the sofa so I could see him better. "I'm rubbish at drawing." "It doesn't matter. It's not about having what you end up with. It's about doing it. It doesn't have to be a drawing. It can be finger painting, a sculpture, or collage." Micah looked vaguely interested. "So I do art and it makes me feel better?" "I'm not sure if it's that simple. But the idea is you focus on your worries while you're working, and it should help. Sometimes it's good to get things out of your head and onto paper." He fixed me with a hard stare. "Sounds like you should take your own advice." He had a point. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I rolled over and took my sketchbook and pencils from the floor where I'd left them. I sat up against the pillows and thought about Micah saying to start small, and I began to draw a tree. One of the proud polars that I'd seen in the photographs, which obviously from where tall trees got its name. I had a vague idea that the mural should be framed by the trees. And perhaps I didn't yet have a plan for what would be in the middle, but I could work on that later. For now, I started small. I let my pencil sweep across the page and tried to lose myself in the rhythm of the shading. It wasn't anything like the paintings I used to do, and that was good. It made it easier. When I woke up the next day, the pad was next to me on the bed and the pencil on the floor. Wiping at the sleep from my eyes, I picked up the drawing and looked at it with some trepidation. But it was okay, I thought. Not amazing, but it was okay. I smiled to myself. Maybe I would draw another tree later. In fact, surprising myself, I turned to a clean page and began to sketch out some of the peonies that were in the garden of tall trees. For more than an hour, I drew and colored the petals, trying to capture the exact shade of pink that warmed the bushes and the heaviness of the blooms. When I got it right, I looked at it with satisfaction. Not perfect, perhaps, but not disastrous. And perhaps I did feel a little bit better, more clear-headed. I put it into a folder and put the folder into my backpack, and then I got ready for work. I was busy at the tall trees that day. There was a lot going on. The bingham man was coming in that afternoon, and the mobile library, which normally came on a Tuesday, had arrived today instead for reasons I didn't properly understand, but which had thrown the residents into great fluster. I'll go and choose you something if you trust me. I told one of my favorite ladies, Joyce, as she hunted for her shoes because when she walked across the car parked at the library. I can't remember the last time I wore them, she muttered, peering under her bed. Maybe I left them in Mr. Ian's room. I smiled at the thought of Joyce being so comfortable in Mr. Ian's space that she took her shoes off. Tell me what you want, and I'll take back the books you've read and choose you some more. Joyce straightened up with a groan. My returns are on the coffee table, she said. Anything along those lines, really. I picked up the books she read. One Stephen King, one Shirley Jackson, and two detective novels. I've been expecting Catherine Cookson or Jane Austen. Vampire Diaries, Vampire, Ghost Emergence, I said. All three preferably, Joyce said, giving me a wink. I took the books and her library card and went down to the corridor. Past Mr. Ian's room, I stuck my head around the door. But he wasn't there. Perhaps he was getting ready for bingo, because I knew he was a fan. I took out the picture of the peony that I'd drawn and left it propped up beside his television. I hoped he'd like it. And then I went out into the miserable afternoon. Inside the library truck, it was quite warm with the rain pattering on the roof. One of the librarians, a nice woman called Sindhu, was showing a book to Kenny. I put Joyce's books on the pile of returns and went to browse the shelves marked horror. Sindhu turned her attention to the returns as Kenny took his book and left. I watched him go through the rain-lashed windows of the truck. He sheltered in the entryway of tall trees as Helen, the odd new resident, came the other way. Intrigued, I watched as Kenny showed her the book he'd borrowed, and she looked, to my astonishment, interested and friendly. She bent over, looked interested. Her head looked to the book as Kenny turned the pages, and I wondered what it was that had captured her attention, as though sensing my eyes on her. She looked at Kenny, and I wondered, as though sensing my eyes on her. Helen looked up at the library van, and I stepped back from the window, now wanting to see if we were crouching. Kenny looks pleased with this book, I said to Sindhu. She smiled. It's about football during the Second World War. She gestured proudly to one of the shelves. We've been bumping up our local history section because they got hotcakes when we visit in the care homes. I followed her gaze, and to my delight, noticed that the shelves are full of books, all about this part of South London during the Blitz and beyond. Perfect inspiration for my Memorial project. Putting down the Dean Koontz I chose for Joyce, I went to go over to the history section. Just as Helen climbed up into the van, she flicked her gaze over me, then made straight for the wartime books. Without even probably reading the titles of the book on offer, she began taking them to the shelf and buying them in her arms. Oh, I said, trying to be polite. Are you taking them all? Helen turned her silly gaze and smiled at Sindhu. I believe I can borrow 10 books on my ticket. That's right, Sindhu said. And you can keep them for 6 weeks. It's an extended loan period, so we're not here every week. Thank you so much, Helen said. She picked up a book called Bombs and Bandages, London's Hospital in Wartime, and tucked it under her elbow. I wanted to reach out and grab it from her arms. Does that mention tall trees? I asked. It was a hospital during the war. Was it, Helen? Said Helen. I nodded. I'd like to know more about it. Well then, I'm sure I'll let you this book when my loan period is up, she said. In 6 weeks was what she said. 6 weeks, and she said. That's not long enough, you can renew. Helen handed the final book about the war to her pile. I may have to, she said. I thought her tone was charming, but I couldn't understand why. I have a lot to get through. I looked at the now empty shelf for all the remaining 2 books about the 60s, which did look interesting but weren't going to help me. Something about the Industrial Revolution. I forced myself to smile at Helen over the top of over a pile of books. You must be interested in local history, huh? I am indeed. She looked guarded suddenly. No, but you're not from here. No, I'm from Ireland. I have some, she paused suddenly, family links with this area. She turned away from me and gave the pile of history books to Cindy to check out. I waited for her to go and then borrowed Joyce's books. She's a big fan of history, Cindy said, tilting her head in the direction that Helen had walked back to the main building. I raised my eyebrows. Apparently so. With Joyce's books in my arms, I hurried back to the main area. Building and shook off the rain. I could see the doorway to Finn's little cupboard, and I walked to the reception, but I couldn't see him. I felt ratty across that Helen had taken all the books from under my nose, but I was nothing of the contrary. So what if Helen was making things hard for me? I was going to do my own bloody research. Maybe I'd even track down Elise Watson myself. Full of determination, I ducked behind the reception desk and went inside Finn's tiny room. He wasn't there, but there was a pad on his desk. So I picked up a pen and wrote, I'm going to base on your own Elsie's book. Any help you can give me, gratefully received. And then, after a moment's thought, I handed my phone number. I hoped he'd call. Chapter 11. Elsie. 1940. Nellie was decorating our flat for Christmas, even though it was still 3 weeks away. She was singing Deck the Halls at the top of her voice as she tried to pin Holly along the mantelpiece without prickling her fingers. La la la, ouch, she warbled. I couldn't help laughing. That's God's way of telling you you're too early, I said. Don't we deserve a bit of Christmas cheer? Here, let me help you, I said. Maybe we should put gloves on to stop the prickly hurting so much. Good plan, Nellie. Went to find our gloves and giggling, we put them on and finished arranging the holly. Why did you get this? I said. There's none in our garden. Park, said Nellie. Percy and I went on a twilight raid. Nellie Malone, you're an awful thief. It was such a hoot, she said. We had to climb over the fence. And Percy got stuck. Honestly, I was going to fall over laughing at that much. You really like him, don't you? I gave her a hug. I'm so glad. She hugged me back. There's a lot of mistletoe in the park too, she said with a cheeky glance in my direction. Perhaps we should take some time to work. I'm not sure there's much call for mistletoe on my ward, I said, pretending to misunderstand. There might be in the huts. My cheeks flushed. Stop it. I said, Metron would be furious if she thought I was parading around the wards, trying to kiss patients. Not patients, said Nellie, emphasizing the S. Just one patient. I'm not sure that would aid his recovery. I bet it would. We both laughed again as Nellie looked at the clock on the mantelpiece. I need to go. I'm meeting Percy before work. She kissed me on the cheek. See you at the hospital later. I'll be there, I said. She rushed around, doing her hair and putting on some rogue, and then I heard her shout goodbye as the front door banged shut. I watched from the window as she went along the path and out onto the street where Jackson was walking along very slowly. He stopped Nellie as she went, and I saw them exchange a few words. Nellie had been practically dancing along, but as soon as she stopped to talk to Jackson, she folded her arms and her shoulders hunched. I couldn't blame her. He had the same effect on me. They both looked up at the window where I stood, and I leaned back a bit, even though I knew they wouldn't be able to see me watching. Nellie was shaking her head and struggling. I didn't got the impression she was telling Jack. She didn't know where I was and found I was grateful for her lie. Nellie looked in, watched, and rushed off. Jackson, though, stayed where he was as Nellie went around the corner. He walked up our path and rang the doorbell. It was loud and the quiet flooded and made me jump. I stayed very still, hoping he'd go away. The bell rang again, and I waited until eventually I saw him walk down the path with a backward glance over the window where I stood, hidden behind the curtain. Honestly, Elsie, I did to myself aloud. He's just a man. But even though I knew Jackson was just looking for me, maybe even doing as Billy had asked him to do, though I still doubted that, I still didn't want to spend any time with him. A knock on the door to the flat made me jump again, but when I'd gathered myself, I realized I had to be Mrs. Cole because I'd seen Jackson walk away and it was on the inside of the door, not the main front door. Even so, I felt nervous. It wasn't like me to be so jumpy. Carefully, I put the chain on the door and opened it at a fraction, just as I thought it was Mrs. Cole. Sighing with relief, I opened the door properly and she came in, carrying a large paper bag. That chap was outside again. She said, the odd one. Jackson, I said to him. I gave her a little worried smile. He's gone. Mrs. Cole gave me a reassuring pat on the arm. I sat on the sofa with a sigh. It just makes me feel uneasy, but I don't want to be rude to him. He always says he wasn't a bad chap. Miss Gold looked unconvinced. Sometimes men don't see other men in the same way we do. A movement outside the window caught my eye and I looked around sharply. But it was just a pigeon swimming past. Goodness, I was really jumpy. A movement outside the window caught my eye and I looked. You're worried about him again, aren't you? Mrs. Gold said. I just know he'll come back. Want me to get Albert to warn him off? I thought of quiet Mrs. Gold with his tweed jackets and dark trim spectacles. Shook my head. Jackson made me why. I said, though whether I was trying to convince myself, Mrs. Gold, or myself, I didn't know. Mrs. Gold looked like she was going to say something else, but she didn't. She looked around at the holly on the mantelpiece. It looks delightfully Christmassy in here. Nellie loves Christmas, I said. She's getting ready, even though it doesn't look quite ready yet. We're both working on Christmas Day anyway. Do you remember last year? People kept saying the war would be over by Christmas, Mrs. Gold said, rolling her eyes. Here another year come and gone and things are worse than ever. I think that's why Nellie's so determined to make the most of celebrating, I said. I think she's got the right idea, Mrs. Gold said, digging into the paper bag she held on her lap. Ta-da. She pulled out a large box tied with a ribbon. It was very pretty, like a present in a shop window. This is for you. I was so pleased that for a moment I couldn't speak. For me, I said eventually. Really? An early Christmas gift. She handed me the box and I gazed at it in wonder. It's too pretty to open. No, it isn't. Untie the ribbon. I pulled the ends of the knot and it came undone. Then I eased off the lid and looked inside. It was a big scrapbook and some pencils. I thought you could use it for your patients, Mrs. Gold said. This is wonderful, I breathed. You're too kind. She waved her hands as if it was nothing. I think it's a good idea and I wanted you to be able to get on and do it. Thank you, I said. I think it's a good idea too. I think if the patient's right about what happened to them, it might be them recovery better. Because sometimes writing things down helps make sense of it in your head, like writing a diary. And it's history, isn't it? It's very important. It's important to record a lot of the time spent destroying papers. Our attention turned. We spent a lot of time. The pages are blank because I thought some of them might prefer to write than draw, and draw than write. That was perfect. You can just give the book to the patients and let them do what they want. I studied the book on my lap. It was large with sturdy covers and the pages were thick. It would withstand a lot of being passed around. Mrs. Gold was very thoughtful. And if they want to write a message to someone to read if the worst happens, to a loved one perhaps, or a sworn enemy, I said, and Mrs. Gold laughed. Yes, either or. If they write a message, you could deliver it if you have to. This isn't just a Christmas present for me, I said. It's a present for every patient in the hospital. Mrs. Gold cheeks went a bit red and she gave me the most dazzling smile. Later, when I was leaving to go to the hospital, Mr. Gold pulled up outside in a motor car. I'd never seen him driving before. He and Mrs. Gold always took the train to work, and now patrol was rationed. Lots of people had stopped driving. He got out of the car looking rather pleased with himself and gave me a cheery wave. I waved back. I don't spend as much time with Mr. Gold as I had with his wife, but he seemed nice enough. Are you off to work? He called, patting through the car. Would you like a lift? Really? Of course. I borrowed this from work. They said I could use it for as long as I needed. That's kind of them. They must think a lot of you. I'm just a small cog in a large wheel, he said. He opened the passenger door. I'll take you to the hospital. If you're sure? Clara would be furious with me if she knew I'd seen you and not offered. He gave me a little smile and tipped his head toward the window. She'd probably be watching us now. That's very nice of you, I said. Thank you. I caught him while Mr. Gold held my back, which was extra heavy because it was full of the new notebook and the pencils Mrs. Gold had given me, and I arranged my coat so I didn't get stuck in the door, and he handed the bag back to me to hold on my lap. He got into the driver's seat and started the engine. I want to say thank you for keeping Clara company when I have to work, he said, pulling away from the curb slightly jerkily. Doesn't like being in the shelter on her own. Nor do I said. We help each other. Well, it means a lot to me, he said, both of us. Likewise. He nodded. What do I think of Mrs. Gold? I asked in alarm and he laughed heartily. No, what do you think of the car? Good, thank goodness I laughed. It's very nice. I lied because one car was very much like another in my mind. I can't believe you thought I called me off the old girl, said Mr. Gold, still chuckling. I smiled at him, though his eyes were fixed on the road as we turned the corner. Still smiling, I looked out of my window, and there, standing at the end of the road, was Jackson. He was watching the cars we passed. His face was twisted in fury. I felt a sudden sense of fear. Was it me he was angry with? Had he seen me get in the car with Mr. Gold? Was that what had made him look so full of rage? I watched him grow smaller in the car's wing mirror as Mr. Gold drove away from the home. I wish that Jackson was really that small and I could squash him with a rolled up newspaper like a fly. All right, Mr. Gold said. You looked worried there for a second. I forced a smile into my face. Just thinking about work, I lied. Must be hard in the hospital. Busy. Busier than I could ever imagined. Can't believe how many extra beds they squeezed in. And extra stuff to help? Not enough. We always need more nurses and porters and cleaners. It's tough. Mr. Gold nodded as he slowed down at the junction. There's strange times indeed. Strange times.